Most people will die never meeting the leader inside them. Not because they lack talent, not because they weren't meant for more, but because they waited for permission, for applause, for someone else to say, "Now you can begin." But what if no one ever gives you that moment? What if the permission you've been waiting for has always been yours to give? This isn't a speech about success. It's not a guide to charisma or tactics. This is a mirror held up to the part of you that has already led in silence but was never celebrated for it. You don't need more motivation. You need to remember. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But in a world obsessed with projection, most people only become what they think will be accepted. So we perform, we chase titles instead of meaning, we wait for recognition instead of alignment, and slowly we forget what it feels like to move from the inside out. But here's the paradox. The longer you wait to be seen, the more invisible you become. You've been looking for the key, but you've never stopped to ask, what if you're the door? There's a compass inside you, older than your education, deeper than your conditioning, but no one taught you how to read it, because no one profits from you being self-led. From the moment you were born, the world began to train you out of yourself. Smile for approval, perform for praise, obey for belonging. Eventually you learn to trust applause over instinct, but Carl Jung believed that inside each of us is something untouched, something whole. He called it the self, not the ego, not the image. The self is the center of your psyche, the place where your deepest truth lives. And that self, it doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't need permission to speak. It already knows who you are. Jung called the process of returning to that self-individuation. It's not the pursuit of success. It's the pursuit of wholeness, not becoming better, becoming real. But the path back isn't comfortable. To reach the self, you have to move through the persona, the mask you created to survive. The persona is what gets praised. It's the charming, competent version of you. But here's the cost. The more you live through the persona, the more distant you become from what's true. And that distance, it begins to ache. It shows up as anxiety, as burnout, as that strange hollowness when you accomplish what you thought you wanted and feel nothing. Because the part of you that's tired isn't tired from doing too much. It's tired from doing too little of what matters. Robin Sharma said, "Leadership is not about a title or designation. It's about impact, influence, and inspiration." But Jung would push it further. It's about inner authority, the kind that doesn't demand to be followed. It invites people to remember themselves in your presence. Because when you lead from the self, you stop leading from ambition. You start leading from alignment. That doesn't look like being first. It looks like being steady. It doesn't look like knowing everything. It looks like trusting something deeper than logic, your own inner compass. And here's the truth most people never realize. When you finally stop outsourcing your power, people begin to feel something around you. Not pressure, permission. You don't need to convince anyone you're a leader. You need to stop pretending you're not. So, ask yourself, what part of me has been whispering all this time while I was busy chasing noise? And if I finally listened, what would happen if I followed it? Because the moment you do, you stop following others, and you start becoming the one others didn't even know they were waiting for. The world rarely teaches this truth, that staying steady, unseen, and unthanked is a form of greatness. You're told to lead by being bold, loud, front-facing, visible. But the strongest leaders often move in silence, not because they are hiding, but because they are rooted. In 1940, a man named Tune Sugihara sat in a Japanese consulate in Lithuania. The Nazi regime was closing in. Thousands of Jewish refugees pleaded for help. Sugihara wasn't a general. He wasn't a politician. He was a clerk. And Tokyo had sent clear instructions: do nothing. But inside Sugihara, something older than protocol stirred. A voice that didn't shout, but refused to be ignored. He wrote visas by hand for days against orders, knowing full well it would cost him his job. It did. But over 6,000 families lived because one man decided that doing what was right was more important than doing what was allowed. Sugihara wasn't granted power. He used presence, and in Jungian terms, this is where the self breaks through the persona, where the inner compass overrides the external role. Carl Jung taught that within us lie ancient archetypes, the hero, the wise one, the protector. They don't emerge when we're rewarded. They emerge when we listen to something deeper than fear. But you don't need to be a diplomat to carry that kind of fire. There's a mother, single, unseen, working 2 jobs, navigating exhaustion, holding the weight of a family with no one to applaud her. She makes meals stretch. She answers midnight cries. She teaches her child loyalty, not through words, but through presence. No promotion, no audience, no break, but a crown nonetheless, worn invisibly. Robin Sharma says, leadership is not about your position, it's about your example. But Jung would argue that example comes from the individuated self, the one no longer trying to be impressive, but to be whole. And what the world sees as background characters are often the quiet pillars holding the room. You've met them. The janitor who remembers your name, the nurse who stays late, the teacher who listens even when the class ends, the friend who shows up when everything's falling apart. They don't need to be right, they need to be real. This is what real leadership looks like. It's not made of elevation, it's made of alignment. The people who don't ask to lead often lead best, because their actions are not driven by status but by truth. And that's the paradox. The less you try to be seen, the more deeply you are felt. There's a burn that lives inside those who carry others in silence. The ache of being strong without applause, of choosing right over recognition. But that burn, that's not resentment, that's your fire, that's leadership. And if you've ever shown up when it was hardest, if you've ever carried a weight no one acknowledged, if you've ever stayed steady when others broke, then you've already led from within. You just didn't call it that. You didn't ask for the crown, but maybe you've been wearing it in silence longer than you knew. We all begin as ourselves, but somewhere along the way, we become what keeps us accepted. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It helps us get jobs, make friends, win approval. But there comes a moment, if you're paying attention, when the mask gets heavier than the truth it hides. You find yourself exhausted in ways you can't explain. Not from effort, but from inauthenticity. From performing a version of yourself that smiles while slowly eroding inside. The persona tells you to keep going, keep pleasing, keep appearing composed. But then a question slips in, quiet, disruptive, undeniable. What if I've built a life around being someone I'm not? And beneath that question, another voice, the one we bury, begins to stir. Jung called that the shadow. It's not evil. It's not a flaw. It's everything you've silenced to keep the peace. Your anger, your desire, your disappointment, your fear. The emotions you edited out of your identity. But what you suppress does not disappear. It waits. And in the moments of crisis, fatigue, or silence, it resurfaces. Jung said, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared. The path to authentic leadership runs straight through that door, because you can't lead from wholeness while pretending you're only made of light. Real power isn't the performance of strength. It's the integration of contradiction. There is a certain kind of tiredness you'll never fix with rest. The tiredness of being disconnected from who you really are. That's the signal, that's the invitation. People don't burn out because they care too much. They burn out because they stop being true. You cannot serve from emptiness. You cannot lead from a mask. But when you face your shadow, not to shame it, but to understand it, something begins to shift. You stop projecting, you stop performing, you start telling the truth. And when you do, others feel it. Because presence is not about being polished. It's about being integrated. Not perfect, whole. You become someone others trust, not because you have the answers, but because your energy says, I've been where you are, I'm not pretending, I'm not hiding. And I still chose to stand. That is magnetic, that is stabilizing, that is leadership. So if you've been holding your breath behind a mask, afraid to be seen for who you really are, this is your call. Not to expose yourself to the world, but to stop hiding from yourself, because the moment you stop denying your shadow, you start carrying your crown with both hands, and in doing so, you make it safe for others to take off their masks too. There is a decision that changes everything. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't come with recognition. It comes in a moment no one else sees. When you finally decide to stop performing and start aligning, you will not be announced. You will not be approved in advance. You will not be given a crown. But leadership begins the moment you choose to carry one anyway. Carl Jung believed that when we stop chasing projections and return to our center, the self begins to lead. Not the persona, not the ego, but the deepest part of you, the compass that knows what is right even when the world tells you to wait. We are taught to follow systems, not instincts, to chase outcomes, not alignment. But that inner compass, the one you silence to belong, is still working. It's not broken, it's buried. And when you choose to follow it, even quietly, you awaken something ancient, not ambition, not image, but sovereignty. There's a line from the Arctic explorer Vilhjálmur Stefansson: what is dangerous is not to venture into the unknown. What is dangerous is never discovering your own capacity to navigate without direction. You've spent your life trying to read other people's maps. Now it's time to trust your own. The people who lead from within rarely look like leaders at first. They're the ones who speak with clarity instead of noise, who act with consistency instead of urgency, who hold space instead of trying to fill it. They don't rush, they anchor, they don't command, they invite, they don't seek control, they cultivate trust. And when others walk into their presence, something shifts. Not because of what they say, but because of what they are. These are the leaders whose crowns are invisible, not because they aren't earned, but because they are embodied. They aren't granted power, they generate it. Robin Sharma said, "The greatest leaders build monuments in hearts, not marble." But Jung would have added, those monuments are built when the individual finally stops outsourcing their authority and begins to act in union with their self. That means saying no when it would be easier to say yes. That means telling the truth when silence would protect you. That means staying in alignment when applause would prefer performance. It will not always feel good, it will feel real. And real is rare. To lead from within is to make a series of quiet decisions that no one claps for. To answer your conscience more than your calendar. To rise not above others but into yourself. You don't need to be followed, you need to be true. And when you are, something happens. People feel safer, seen. They find a path in your presence. Not because you drew a map, but because you became one. You didn't ask for the crown, but maybe you've been wearing it all along. So stop waiting for a moment when the world validates your voice. Your choice, made daily, made honestly, is the crown. And the compass has been waiting for you to remember which way it points. This began with a question. What if you've been waiting for something that was always waiting on you? We spend years chasing credentials, applause, followers, and still feel unworthy. But Carl Jung taught that life doesn't begin when the world sees you. Life begins when you finally see yourself. The self isn't earned, it's remembered. And when you remember it, leadership is no longer something you perform. It's something you become. You no longer ask for approval. You ask, is this true to who I am? You no longer chase certainty. You choose alignment. Even when it costs you comfort. Even when it costs you being liked. The greatest leaders are not those who shout the loudest. They are the ones who've done the deepest inner work, who've faced their shadow, removed their mask, and still stood tall. They are the ones who carry the crown, not on their head, but in their actions. The ones who realize that every moment is a choice. Not between success and failure, but between persona and self. The fire you've been tending in secret. It's not small, it's sacred. The choices you've made in silence, they've shaped lives more than you know. The leadership you've offered without being called a leader, it has already created a ripple in the world. But now it's time to stop pretending it's not real. You carried the weight without applause. You held the line when no one noticed. That wasn't invisibility, that was leadership in its purest form. You don't need more permission, you don't need more preparation. You need to own what has already begun. You're not waiting for a title, you're not waiting to be chosen, you are not waiting to lead because you already have. You just didn't call it that. So here's what I ask, not as a prompt, but as a return to yourself. Tell me in the comments in your heart, where have you led from within? What quiet decision changed someone's life? What moment did you rise, not with noise, but with depth? And if this reminded you of your own strength, share it, because someone else out there is still waiting for the permission you just claimed. This isn't just a video, it's a mirror. And if you saw even a piece of yourself in it, then maybe it's time to stop searching. Because the leader you've been waiting for was always you.